The studio lights of Tucker Tonight burned brighter than usual. There was a buzz of electric tension in the room. Carlson was preparing what he believed would be his most devastating on-air takedown yet. Armed with what he teased as explosive hypocrisy, the veteran host was convinced he could publicly humiliate the actor who played Jesus in The Chosen and had recently become an unlikely cultural icon for millions of Americans. But what Tucker didn't know was that Jonathan Roumie had walked in with something far more powerful than any soundbite. Truth, calmly delivered, meticulously prepared, and morally unshakable, was about to flip the script entirely. For weeks, Fox News had promoted the interview as the confrontation of the year. Carlson's team compiled clips of his most aggressive showdowns, verbal eviscerations of politicians, celebrities, and activists who had dared to challenge conservative orthodoxy. Executives cleared the network's evening lineup in anticipation of record-breaking numbers. Conservative influencers were salivating, promising their audiences that this would be the night the Hollywood holy man got exposed. Right-wing blogs dug deep into Roumie's background, searching for anything that could be spun into scandal. They questioned his faith, his motives, and even his depiction of Christ on screen. Their goal was simple: hand Carlson the ammunition he needed to tear Roumie apart on live TV. But they misunderstood who they were dealing with. Before we get to the moment that changed everything, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell, because this isn't just a media clash. This is where silence meets noise, where humility stands against hubris, and where truth speaks, softly, but with the power to shake institutions. The stage was set for what would become one of the most stunning confrontations ever aired. Two powerful men, two completely different visions of America, and one moment that would ripple far beyond the studio walls. This wasn't a debate. This was spiritual warfare, cloaked in primetime television. Tucker Carlson had built his empire on confrontation. At 50, he had become Fox News' most provocative voice, gleefully skewering gaze with biting sarcasm and smug certainty. His fan base loved him for it. To them, he was the voice of outrage, the warrior against wokeness. He lived comfortably, with wealth and influence at his fingertips. He didn't lose arguments, because he rarely let his guests finish a sentence. But tonight would be different. Jonathan Roumie was not a politician. He wasn't there to score points. He was a practicing Catholic, a man of prayer, humility, and quiet strength. The son of an immigrant father and raised in working-class New York, he had come to fame not through controversy, but by embodying compassion. His portrayal of Jesus had touched millions, not with spectacle, but with stillness. He didn't seek the spotlight, yet somehow it found him. And now, seated across from one of the most polarizing voices in American media, he was facing the most orchestrated ambush of his life. But Jonathan didn't flinch. Fox's producers had expected a massacre. They had filled the audience with Carlson supporters, handed out cue cards, and even prepared viral hashtags in advance. Tucker crushes, Roumie, Hollywood hypocrite, a false prophet exposed. They didn't realize Jonathan had spent his whole life preparing. Not for applause, but for moments like this. The lights came up. Tucker Carlson leaned forward with his signature half smile and narrowed eyes. Roumie sat calmly, hands gently folded, his charcoal gray suit unassuming, his presence centered. There was no flash, no performance, only presence. The war of noise was about to begin, but the one who came in silence was about to win. They had choreographed this performance countless times. With AOC, with Ilhan Omar, with any young progressive who dared challenge the narrative Fox News carefully constructed. The outcome was always the same: an aggressive ambush, a theatrical takedown, and a primetime victory lap. Tonight was supposed to be no different, or so Tucker Carlson believed. He leaned in, his voice dripping with mock courtesy. "Jonathan, thank you for finally finding the courage to join me on my show. Though I do wonder, will you still have that courage once I've revealed who you really are?" The crowd stirred. This was the Tucker they adored. Cocky, caustic, ready for blood. Cheers erupted from his studio loyalists. Some clapped, others whistled, sensing the slaughter they were promised was about to begin. Jonathan Roumie smiled gently, nodding once. His voice was calm, measured, kind. "Thank you for having me, Tucker. I'm looking forward to our conversation." That answer alone irritated Carlson. He'd seen this posture before, the serene guest acting above it all. Just before he dismantled them, he relaxed into his seat like a wolf studying its prey. But Tucker wasn't here for a conversation. He was here for conquest. "Let's skip the pleasantries," he snapped, leaning forward. "You're a Hollywood actor who plays Jesus, And yet here you are, preaching politics, endorsing leftist causes, and pretending you speak for everyday Americans. You've never known struggle. You've never lived in their world. And quite frankly, you're just another out-of-touch elitist in a designer suit playing prophet on camera. The first blow landed. The audience roared. Carlson smirked. This was going exactly as planned. Romy remained still, his hands resting gently on the table. "I appreciate your passion," he said softly. "But with respect, I don't speak for anyone. I serve, and that includes listening, especially to those who have been ignored." "Oh, please," Carlson snapped, his voice rising. "Spare us the humble act. You're on billboards. You're in glossy magazines. You speak at sold-out events. Now you want us to believe you're some sort of spiritual shepherd for truck drivers and factory workers?" A few in the crowd chuckled nervously. Carlson was escalating. "And you dare to talk about morality while you share stages with activists who mock faith, insult tradition, and push an agenda that undermines everything this country stands for. You call that faith? You call that leadership?" Jonathan still didn't flinch. His gaze was calm, almost sorrowful. "I call that compassion," he said. "I call it stepping into discomfort for the sake of truth. Jesus didn't avoid uncomfortable places, and neither should we." Carlson scoffed and stood, voice thundering now. "You're not Jesus, Jonathan. You're an actor, a millionaire in a costume who preaches love while standing next to people who hate everything sacred. You want to talk about truth? Then let's talk about who you really are." The audience was nearly on their feet. Tucker's producers were nodding behind the glass. The ambush was peaking. Jonathan tilted his head slightly, letting the room go quiet before he spoke again. "Tucker," he said gently, "are you finished? Because I'd like to respond, not with anger, but with facts." Carlson laughed, a loud, performative bark. "The only fact that matters is that you're a fraud, a puppet for Hollywood progressives trying to rebrand faith to fit a liberal agenda. And frankly, it's insulting." But Rumi wasn't rattled. "I believe in the dignity of every person," he said. "That's not a liberal idea. That's a sacred one." Carlson rolled his eyes and waved dismissively. "You actors are all the same. Polished, vague, evasive. But let's talk specifics, shall we?" He turned to the camera. "This man, Jonathan Rumi, has stood with groups that support government handouts, open borders, even defunding the police. He calls it mercy. I call it weakness. The kind of weakness that destroys nations." There were scattered cheers. Carlson could feel the momentum returning to him. "You say you know America, but you live in gated neighborhoods and fly private. You preach humility while accepting 5-figure speaking fees. You quote scripture while hiding behind agents and PR firms. Tell me, Jonathan, where exactly does Jesus fit into that?" Rumi's face didn't change, but his hands moved. Calmly, he reached into a worn leather folder beside him and pulled out a stack of papers. The gesture was quiet, almost reverent. "I've been listening carefully to everything you've said," he began. "And you're right, facts do matter." Carlson paused, narrowing his eyes. "So let's look at some." Rumi laid the first document flat on the desk. "These are public financial disclosures, Tucker. Yours. Available to anyone who cares enough to read them. And they show something interesting about a man who claims to speak for real Americans." The room went still. Carlson blinked. The energy shifted. The smugness faltered. "You see," Jonathan continued, his voice still steady, "before I came here tonight, I did what I always do. I prayed, and then I did my homework." He turned the document to face the camera. "This shows your company accepted over $600,000 in speaking fees from a lobbying group that actively campaigned against minimum wage increases, while you went on air and told Americans you were fighting for them." Gasps, murmurs, a flicker of panic behind the control room glass. Carlson's jaw tightened. Rumi laid down the second page. "And here, a memo sent to your producers 2 weeks ago, urging you to avoid inviting clergy who had criticized your stance on immigration. It was flagged as potential brand damage." Carlson opened his mouth, closed it. The silence was now thunderous. Jonathan leaned back slightly, folding his hands again. "You came here for war," he said gently. "I came with truth, not to attack you, but to remind you, truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a place to stand." And suddenly, Tucker Carlson, the master of monologue, had nothing left to say. What had started as Tucker Carlson's grand ambush of Jonathan Rumi had suddenly turned into something else entirely. The hunter had become the hunted, and the battle had shifted from sound bites to something sacred. In the control room, Fox News executives were panicking. This wasn't going according to plan. Their star, their undefeated gladiator of primetime, was visibly shaken. Carlson, who built a career on shredding opponents, now sat frozen as Rumi slowly, quietly unwrapped document after document with the grace of a man unpacking truth. Not for victory, but for clarity. Producers were firing off frantic messages in Slack channels. One whispered into his headset, "Do we cut to commercial?" But it was too late. The audience, both in the studio and at home, felt it. The power had shifted. Carlson, once brimming with arrogance, now sat opposite a man who had come not to fight, but to reveal, and who had clearly done his homework. Meanwhile, social media had already exploded. Clips of Jonathan's calm, fact-driven responses began flooding Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. The hashtags #TuckerUndone, #RumiReveals, and #QuietStorm began trending, hijacking the very narrative the network had built up for weeks. Viewers didn't need a commentator to tell them what was happening. They could feel it. They were witnessing a spiritual reckoning. Live. The silence in the studio was deafening. Tucker Carlson, just minutes ago booming over his desk with confident disdain, now sat slouched, staring at a single sheet of paper in Jonathan Rumi's hands. Rumi's voice, though soft, now carried a force that demanded stillness. "You wanted to talk about being out of touch with real America," he began, his tone like a father correcting a wayward child. "Let's talk about your $4.8 million estate in Boca Grande. Let's talk about the six-figure checks you collect for appearances. Let's talk about how a man who earns more than $7 million a year dares to accuse teachers, nurses, and single mothers of being dependent on the government." The first document hit like thunder. The audience, which had cheered Tucker just moments earlier, fell completely still. Carlson's mouth parted slightly, but he couldn't speak. Rumi wasn't finished. "And that's just the beginning," he said gently, laying down a second document. "You called me a puppet for some supposed left-wing movement, but I wonder if you'd like to explain this." He held up what appeared to be a speaker contract. Camera zoomed in, clearly legible. "This is from 2020, Rumi explained. A $150,000 payment you accepted to speak at an event hosted by an organization that, at the time, was under active federal investigation for defrauding veterans." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some visibly recoiled. Carlson leaned forward, hands trembling, trying to reassert control. That's completely out of context," he stammered. "I wasn't aware of—" "Oh, but you were," Rumi interrupted, calm but unyielding. He reached again into his folder and retrieved an email. "This was sent to your agent 3 weeks before that event. It mentioned the investigation directly. Your agent forwarded it to you with a note that said, 'FYI, might want to skip this one.'" The revelation hit like a lightning bolt. Even the cameramen, professionals who had seen dozens of heated interviews in that studio, paused. They knew they were capturing television history. Carlson sat back down, pale. His smirk was gone. His posture wilted. His poker face, perfected over decades, had finally cracked. Rumi leaned forward now, his voice quieter but sharper. "And you didn't skip it. You took the money, you shook their hands, you smiled for the camera. You told your audience you were fighting for working-class Americans while pocketing money from the very companies stealing from them." The Fox News cameras recorded every detail. Carlson's stunned expression, the scattered whispers among audience members, and the calm, unwavering presence of the man who now clearly owned the room. This wasn't a reversal. This was a moral collapse. Carlson opened his mouth. "How dare you?" he began, but Rumi didn't raise his voice. "Oh, we're just beginning," he said softly. He reached into his folder once more and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "These," he said, "are public complaints filed against you over the past decade. Two separate allegations of professional misconduct, platform manipulation, and deliberate disinformation." Whispers turned into stunned silence. "You question my integrity," Rumi continued, "while carrying this burden. So let me ask, who's really the puppet? The man who speaks from conviction, or the man who performs for applause while hiding what he knows to be wrong?" Carlson leapt from his seat now, face flushed red with a cocktail of rage and shame. "This is outrageous! You come on to my show and attack me with lies." "Lies," Rumi responded, now standing too, calm, still, towering in moral stature. "These are court records, your contracts, your own emails. If they're lies, then they're your lies." You don't understand the context, Carlson barked, but Rumi raised a single hand, not to silence, but to invite quiet. Context, he echoed. Let me offer some. You spent 10 minutes trying to dismantle my reputation with slander and assumptions. You called me a fraud, a puppet, a danger to America, all while standing on a foundation you knew was rotten. He gestured toward the documents between them. So tell me, Tucker, who was really out of touch? The question hung in the air like incense. For the first time in his career, Tucker Carlson was speechless on his own show. Behind the glass, Fox News executives were in meltdown mode. Phones were ringing, Slack messages were flying. According to one source, even Rupert Murdoch himself had called the control room with a single seething question. How the hell did you let this happen? The network's crisis management team was already scrambling. They knew this wasn't just a bad interview. It was a full-scale disaster, one that would dominate news cycles for days, maybe weeks. Editors across major outlets were reassigning reporters to verify every document Jonathan Rumi had calmly revealed on live television. The Associated Press had already dispatched 3 investigative journalists. The Washington Post was preparing what one insider called a career obituary in long form. Meanwhile, social media managers from CNN and MSNBC were working overtime, cutting clips of Tucker's unraveling into highlight reels set to dramatic music. Within hours, professionally edited videos would circulate, showing Tucker's humiliation, pause by pause, blink by blink. Back in the studio, Rumi's voice, gentle but unshakable, continued to echo. You want to talk about qualifications? He stood tall, not angry, not boastful, simply grounded. I didn't inherit my position. I don't sit here because of wealth or connections. I'm not here because I played a role. I'm here because millions of people saw truth in a performance, and I chose to honor that responsibility with integrity. He glanced toward the camera. I serve, not command. I speak not to dominate, but to offer something we've forgotten in our politics: dignity. The transformation was complete. What had begun as Tucker's ambush had become Jonathan Rumi's masterclass in spiritual and moral confrontation. He hadn't just defended himself, he had dismantled his opponent. And he had done it using only truth, evidence, and calm preparation. As for being a puppet, Rumi added as he gently began gathering his papers, I've never taken a dime from companies under federal investigation. I've never ignored warnings about ethics. And I've never lectured others from a pedestal I refuse to step down from myself. Tucker was still standing, but barely. He looked around, desperate, as if someone might save him. But his own producers sat stunned. His audience, once loud and sure, was now eerily silent. Then came the moment that would define it all. During a commercial break, cameras caught Carlson whispering desperately to his producer. One audience member with excellent lip reading would later post on X, formerly Twitter. How did he get all of this? We need to end this now. But there was no exit. They were live. Cutting away would only worsen the damage. When the show returned, Tucker Carlson tried one last desperate pivot. Jonathan, and he said, forcing a half smile, you've clearly spent a lot of time preparing for this moment, but documents can be taken out of context. What really matters are results. He had hoped to regain the narrative, but Rumi was already reaching for his final file. Let's talk about results then, he said softly. He pulled out a report, clean, simple, official. This is a comprehensive analysis of your work as a commentator and producer at this network. It includes data on misinformation corrections, public retractions, and the financial impact of your most controversial segment. Tucker's face turned pale. It shows that over 40% of your investigative segments have required post-broadcast corrections. It shows that advertisers have dropped millions in ad revenue following ethical concerns tied directly to your content. And it shows that your program holds the highest internal complaint rate across all Fox News programming, including from your own staff. The audience sat stunned. This final blow wasn't about morality. It wasn't about money. It was about competence. Jonathan had just proven that even by Tucker's own standards, he had failed. He let the report sit on the desk between them like a verdict. So when we talk about results, Tucker, whose results are we really discussing? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He didn't gloat. He simply let the truth speak, and the truth had spoken with thunder. I think your audience deserves better, Rumi concluded, than someone who lectures them about virtue while taking checks from companies under criminal investigation. They deserve better than someone who questions others' integrity while hiding their own. Tucker slowly sat down. His hands trembled, his voice gone. He had walked into what he thought would be an easy victory and instead suffered the most devastating defeat of his career. Jonathan tilted his head softly. "Is there anything else you'd like to say, Tucker?" It wasn't sarcasm. It sounded almost pastoral, like a teacher giving one last chance to a failing student. Tucker looked up, his eyes no longer sharp but blurred with confusion. I think we need a break," he mumbled. But it was too late for breaks. The damage had been done. The moment was over. The story had already begun to write itself. As the cameras cut to commercial, the silence in the studio was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the shuffle of someone shifting uncomfortably in their seat. Carlson slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the documents that had just disassembled his platform, his persona, and his pride. Jonathan Roumie calmly gathered his papers and placed them in his leather briefcase. He had done the unthinkable. He had dismantled Tucker Carlson on his own show using nothing but facts and moral clarity. When the show returned, Tucker was gone. A Fox News producer stepped in awkwardly. "Due to technical difficulties, we're ending tonight's program early," but everyone knew the truth. There were no technical difficulties, just the emotional breakdown of one of Fox News's biggest voices. Within minutes, the internet caught fire. Jonathan Roumie destroys. Tucker trended on X, crossing 100,000 tweets within the hour. TikToks, Reels, mashups, all spreading like wildfire. Tucker got demolished. How did Fox let this happen? He brought Jesus energy to a knife fight and won. Even conservatives were stunned. They had come expecting a sermon. What they got was a reckoning. But it wasn't just conservatives who were talking. Across the country and around the world, Democrats, independents, moderates, progressives, and even apolitical young people were celebrating what many now called the takedown of the decade. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "This is what happens when you bring receipts to a fight." Jonathan Roumie just gave a masterclass in how to handle right-wing smear tactic. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow posted, "Roumie didn't just win that debate. He rewrote the rules of public discourse. Preparation defeats performance every single time." Even former President Barack Obama, who rarely comments on day-to-day media, broke his silence with a short but devastatingly pointed tweet. "When they go low, we go prepared." Well done, Jonathan. Even some Republicans, privately and anonymously, admitted Carlson had been completely outmaneuvered. One GOP strategist told Politico, "Tucker walked into a moral buzzsaw. Roumie didn't play politics. He came with documentation. It was like watching a monk debate a megaphone." The moment exploded far beyond political circles. On TikTok, clips of Carlson's awkward silences and Roumie's gentle but piercing responses racked up millions of views. Teens and college students, many of whom had never heard of Tucker Carlson, shared videos with laughing emojis, fire symbols, and captions like, "POV, you tried to drag a man of prayer into your circus, and he brought scripture and receipts." Another viral clip showed the exact moment Tucker's face turned pale when Roumie held up the first document, with the caption, "When you realize you picked the wrong one to mess with." Celebrities reacted too. Trevor Noah tweeted, "Jonathan Roumie just reminded the world that preparation is power. Take notes." Actress Kerry Washington posted, "This is what happens when humility meets truth. Roumie didn't play the game. He changed the arena." Even international observers were stunned. The BBC's North America correspondent wrote, "American media discourse reached a turning point tonight. Jonathan Roumie's methodical dismantling of Tucker Carlson represents a cultural and spiritual shift in how ideological confrontations will be fought in the digital age." News networks scrambled to book Roumie for interviews. CNN, MSNBC, even some Fox News competitors. They all wanted to hear from the quiet man who had just, without theatrics or shouting, rewritten how you confront power. Media critics flooded column inches with praise and post-mortems. Margaret Sullivan at The Washington Post wrote, "Carlson's collapse wasn't just about being unprepared. It was about underestimating someone who didn't need to shout to be heard." Jonathan Martin at The New York Times noted, "This wasn't politics. It was surgical preparation meets moral presence." Roumie proved that you don't have to match rage with rage. You can overwhelm it with calm truth. Even conservative media didn't know how to spin it. Sources inside Fox News reported emergency meetings about what to do. Tucker's producers were under scrutiny. His show, one executive hinted, might be restructured or paused. The documents Rumi had exposed were now in the hands of journalists and lawyers alike. The $150,000 speaking fee from a company later convicted of fraud, it raised serious ethical questions, not just about Tucker's media credibility, but about his judgment and his values. Former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance tweeted, 37 integrity complaints isn't a red flag, it's a pattern. This deserves real legal attention. But perhaps the biggest impact wasn't on Carlson, it was on Jonathan Rumi. Overnight, the soft-spoken actor, best known for portraying Jesus, had become a national figure of moral authority. His office was flooded with interview requests, speaking engagements, book deals, and political speculation. Democratic strategists whispered that he could be the spiritual bridge to Gen Z and Gen X voters, a man of faith, clarity, and conscience who transcended politics without abandoning it. CNN's Van Jones said on air, Rumi just showed Democrats and America how to fight back with grace. No yelling, no dodging, just truth, calm, prepared, and fearless. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Tucker Carlson, the millionaire media machine, surrounded by handlers and advertisers, had been dismantled by a man who came alone, carrying only truth. For many viewers, this wasn't about television. It wasn't even about politics. It was about a generational shift, where bluster lost to calm, ego lost to humility, and propaganda fell before preparation. The consequences for Fox News were immediate and severe. Advertisers began pulling their sponsorships from Carlson's show. Some brands issued public statements distancing themselves. Others went silent, quietly rerouting their budgets elsewhere. In the days that followed, Fox's ratings plummeted, especially among the coveted 25-54 age demographic, which practically vanished from Carlson's time slot. A longtime Fox viewer wrote on Facebook, I've watched Tucker for years, but after seeing that, I don't know who to trust anymore. If he was lying about that stuff, what else has he lied about? Within 48 hours, the financial fallout was brutal. Over $2 million lost in ad revenue, multiple affiliate stations receiving complaints. Even MyPillow issued a vague statement. We are currently reevaluating our media partnerships. Competing news outlets had a field day. CNN's Brian Stelter aired a segment titled, How Tucker Carlson Lost Everything in 22 Minutes. MSNBC's primetime shows ran looped coverage of Rumi's takedown for 3 nights straight, calling it the most devastating exposure of a right-wing host in modern broadcast history. And all of it, the trending hashtags, the lost revenue, the political fallout, began with a single decision: to underestimate a man who walks in silence, but carries the weight of truth. Tucker Carlson's show, which typically averaged 2.5 million viewers, plummeted to just 800,000 the following week. But the real blow came where it hurt Fox News most. The coveted 25-54 demographic all but abandoned the program. Viewership in that age group collapsed, not just in numbers, but in trust. Industry analysts immediately began asking a radical question. Could a single confrontation fundamentally reshape how political interviews are conducted on cable news? According to Variety's television critic, Jonathan Rumi just raised the bar for preparation and accountability. Other public figures, political and not, will study this moment, and hosts will think twice before launching personal attacks without bulletproof research. Meanwhile, Rumi's quiet storm had galvanized a movement. Faith communities, centrists, progressive Christians, students, and even secular activists felt energized by what had happened. Donations flooded into causes Rumi supported, not political campaigns, but scholarships, faith-based justice work, and storytelling initiatives rooted in compassion. Young men and women across America, particularly those who felt unseen in both faith and politics, were newly inspired. Colleges reported a surge of interest in theology, public service, and law. Professors pointed to Rumi's performance as an example of what it means to speak truth under pressure. The long-term implications for American discourse were just beginning to be understood. But one thing was already clear. The old model, where the loudest voice and the biggest platform automatically won, was broken. Jonathan Rumi had shown that preparation, humility, and facts could not only withstand aggression, they could overpower it. As for Tucker Carlson, his future was now uncertain. Fox News had not issued a clear statement, but insiders whispered that his days as the unshakable face of conservative commentary might be numbered. The man who had built a career by attacking others had finally met someone who fought back and won decisively. But the story wasn't over. Journalists began digging deeper into the documents Rumi had calmly presented. The 150,000 speaking scandal? It was just the beginning. That led to discoveries of other undisclosed financial arrangements, backroom deals, and ethical questions that stretched far beyond one interview. The misconduct complaints, they reignited a national conversation about truth in media, responsibility in journalism, and what moral leadership really looks like. Law schools began circulating Rumi's performance as required viewing. Professor Jonathan Turley of George Washington University Law School tweeted, "Rumi's appearance was a masterclass in preparation and precision. He anticipated every attack, and he let the facts carry the weight. This should be studied in every advocacy class in the country." Tucker Carlson's continued silence became a story of its own. He didn't return to the air for several days. Fox News issued only a brief statement. "We are reviewing the matter internally," but insiders admitted major changes were coming to the weekend lineup. The confrontation between Jonathan Rumi and Tucker Carlson will be remembered as a turning point, the night when the old guard's dominance cracked, the moment when quiet conviction silenced performance art, the hour when documentation and dignity triumphed over spin. For many across America, especially young believers, students, and those tired of media warfare, Rumi became something rare, a symbol that you don't need to shout to be heard, that you don't have to play their game to win. He became a role model. He had proven that truth, courage, and composure could still win in an age of noise. And that is how Jonathan Rumi didn't just defend himself against Tucker Carlson's attacks. He dismantled one of the most powerful voices in conservative media, using nothing but quiet preparation and undeniable truth. If this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell. We'll continue covering the most important moments in political, cultural, and spiritual discourse from a place of clarity and truth. Who do you think Jonathan Rumi should sit across from next? Let us know in the comments below.